So the opening of Parliament is behind us, and we're looking forward to the debate that follows. It kicks off at 10 o'clock this morning. We'll take you there live when it does. But let's look at the substance of the president's speech last night, the reaction of the political parties, and the actual future of the country under this new GNU. To do that, we're joined by Dr. Sysman Motloung, a lecturer in political studies at the University of the Northwest. Dr. Motloung, good morning. Welcome. Thank you very much for your time. I think the biggest question, whose speech was it anyway?
Hi, morning, Iman. Thanks for having me. This is very interesting. It's even something when we were talking with the students yesterday about it, the sentiments were this is a rehash of what we have had before. It's more of a promises that we have had since Mr. Ramaphosa started presidency. So you could say this speech is a remix of what has been spoken before. It is typical ANC speech, but I've also heard to some extent when you realize how he also spoke more about the resuscitation of public-private partnerships, the PPPs. Some have already been saying you can hear a more nuanced influence of the Democratic Alliance in that. So we can say this is a speech of a government of national unity.
I want to go back to what we have heard before, and I'll address that a little bit later on. Let's start with the cohesiveness of what he presented against the backdrop of what would have, well, we're assuming would have had to have been fierce debate inside the GNU at the recent Cabinet Lekgotla to reach consensus on priorities and how to tackle them. Here's the thing, Sysman, he's asked for South Africans to behave like weaver birds. Weavers, he said, are among the most efficient and gregarious birds in that they build complex structures together and cooperate. Was this weaver bird-like?
Yeah, this is something I think very in vogue. If we are to say the present and future of modern societies, it has to be looked at through that lens of cooperation. I think it is now an issue of the past where we have a statist approach where we expect the government to carry all the responsibility. We are now questioning what the role of the private sector is. What is the role of citizens individually and as cooperatives? How do we work together to facilitate that future and a society of purpose? We cannot sit by and expect government to do everything. And as residents, we're only complaining about it. It has to be seen in a manner how even local municipalities look at residents as partners in the development initiatives, not to exclude them or even see them as an opposition, like we've seen in the province of Northwest in the past years, where municipalities were failing and residents wanted to step in and provide services. Government looked at them as an enemy, bastardizing them or demonizing them. That approach should come to an end. Instead, we should be working together. I think this is the message. And if we are to see a better future, that is the approach we should be following.
Well, let's talk about echoes, right? And what we've heard before. From our largest metros to our deepest rural areas, we have a clear intention, the president said, to turn our country into a construction site. As roads, bridges, houses, schools, hospitals and clinics are built, as broadband fibre is laid and as new power lines are installed. Again, this has a familiar ring to it. And I recall a few years ago, and well, this is a few years old now, and this intention is something that economist Neva Makgetla, who was writing in 2022, warned against. She said it was easy to talk of South Africa being turned into a construction site through vast infrastructure programs, but it ignores experience both in South Africa and internationally of building projects gone wrong. She said South Africa's last big infrastructure push brought an oversupply of world-class soccer stadiums, the notoriously faulty and expensive Medupi and Kusile power plants, and never-ending controversies over tolls in Gauteng. Did he rely on a desire we have for exactly that to happen, but fail to bring, a clear, targeted and sustainable way it should be unfolding in?
Yeah, definitely. Those are famous examples or notorious examples of project management gone wrong and the legacy of apartheid and where development was uneven. But there is also a legacy of corruption that spiked after the democratic dispensation. Now it is a question of how those problems would be minimized. One, when we talk about that construction, creating a country into a construction site, you hear him. He's talking more about building dams, building roads, bridges. But where and what quality of this? Because we've seen in the KZN and some parts of Eastern Cape in the last year when bridges were built, public sentiment was like, what really is that what we desire, especially for communities that are distanced from CBDs because of rivers and bridges that have been washed away? Will those infrastructure withstand the climate impacts that we are already experiencing? That's one thing. And these developments, to what extent do they include people in rural communities to even improve their livelihoods? Afterward, you are talking about how this infrastructure could be utilized. In the Eastern Cape, we've also heard on how swimming pools were invested in but not completed. So that is a problem that has to be overcome currently. Other than that, it is a matter of fact that local rural communities are underdeveloped, and it is important for them to be upgraded and connected, especially with internet, because people who are in the rural communities don't have access to internet. We've seen students here when they are at home, especially during COVID, it was a hectic experience for them that they could not complete their assessments. There's no network there. We really experience a big challenge in that regard.
You know, I'm just reflecting on what you said to us moments ago, Prof. Motloung, around including stakeholders like communities in the Northwest example that you invoked, and how this is such a missed opportunity over and over again for government to partner with people, to partner with businesses who are, you know, already operating in certain areas and begin to muscularize them and help scale them to do the things that they know and understand to do best where they live. But I want to go to some of the other things that he said and what the prospects are for it shifting the needle on some of the country's most pressing problems: inclusive growth, job creation, rolling back poverty. Were these the right ones, and did he say enough about them? I mean, we are mindful of the fact that he did say, look, there are going to be further discussions. We'll be able to tool and you know, solve for some of the detail. But were those the right notes, and did he say enough?
Yeah, I think those are the right notes. It's what is expected. The issue, when I was thinking, when there were complaints or criticisms around, is there a need for a government of national unity, considering that this approach or mechanism is implemented in a country that is divided by war and conflict? And I was thinking, could we rationalize a government of national unity in the context of a country plagued by inequality and unemployment and poverty? And we say this is a government of national unity to really focus on those in economic inequalities. Then that is an obvious challenge of our country. We need employment, especially for young people. Now, the issue is when he spoke also about having created 2 million jobs, and there was a Rauraunyana there in parliament. And it's true, go to schools, look how we employed young people to become teacher assistants. The complaint around that, the concern is, how sustainable are these jobs? It should be job creation, not only for 6 months, 1 month, or this prevalence of internships where students after 2 internship or 2 years, they remain unemployed. It has to be sustainable job creation. And it has to be inclusive in a sense that young people, even not necessarily young people, anyone who wants to be an entrepreneur should have an access to a market. The element of gatekeepers in certain sectors has to be addressed. You spoke about some red tapes. These are things we need to be looking at. I think every South African should feel an opportunity to participate in the economy, and from that participation, have a return that is satisfying for them to actualize their life aspirations. Right. As long as South Africans don't achieve their life aspirations, they become frustrated and the sentiment that democracy is not working, it deepens and takes root.
Political reaction was varied, it was hot, and some of the words we heard: no confidence, offered nothing new, thin on plans, on bold ideas, thin credibility. The MK's Dr. John Klopper said it was very clear the president didn't prepare the speech himself. If anything, he said it was the parties in the GNU. My guess it was prepared by the DA members. On jobs, he accused the president of being a liar, a serious-minded liar, in fact, saying the speech didn't also address critical issues like Palestine. And Dr. Klopper said, we know why he's not doing that. Is it because the DA is watching him in the GNU? He can't address it because their policies differ in respect of Palestine. Quick wrap, your thoughts on the opposition reaction?
No, I think the opposition will be typical in that regard. We could say they wanted him to specify Palestine, or maybe here he's been diplomatic as well, considering the dynamics of a GNU. But he did speak about how South Africans should experience freedom, and it should be freedom that also enjoyed by everyone else in the world. I think he was quoting or rephrasing Martin Luther King on that part. But other responses from opposition was that we need to see implementation, and this is a typical sentiment from everyone in South Africa, that don't make only promises, but show us on implementation. That is something that is more in demand. And I think he did anticipate that reply, and he mentioned it in the speech that maybe the medium-term framework would speak to those details and deadlines. Other than that, I think you still see a balanced view. There are those who are highly critical and seeing this as a neo-colonial project, a presidency or an administration that will now advance the interests of your private sector instead of equalizing the economy, opportunities of participation.
Dr. Sysman, Motloung, thank you very much for your time and for your analysis. I'd be interested to hear more about how your students reacted to the speech yesterday, but thank you for sharing what you did. We appreciate your time.